At my husband's funeral, my daughter-in-law laughed at my dress. She didn't know I owned the venue. I never thought my life would become a story of such exquisite revenge. But here I am, Rosa, and if you're listening to this on Voices of Rosa, please hit that subscribe button and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. Because what happened next will show you exactly why you should never, ever underestimate a grieving Black woman with secrets deeper than the Mississippi and pockets fuller than a Sunday collection plate. That sharp, tinkling laugh still echoes in my ears like breaking crystal, cutting through the hushed reverence of my beloved Victor's funeral service. There I stood in my threadbare black dress, the same one I'd worn to my mother's funeral 30 years ago, greeting mourners with the practiced grace of a woman who'd spent 68 years learning how to survive in a world that tried to make me invisible. Bianca swept past me in her designer mourning attire, her heels clicking against the marble floor like judgments being rendered. And she had the audacity to mock my appearance. "Positively ancient," she whispered, loud enough for others to hear, like something from a thrift store. The humiliation burned through my grief like acid, but what she didn't know, what none of them knew, was that I wasn't just the grieving widow in the corner. I was the woman who owned every brick, every chandelier, every blade of manicured grass in that entire establishment. And honey, the reckoning that followed would shake our family to its very foundations. My name is Alara Thompson, though my friends call me Rosa, a nickname that stuck from childhood when my grandmother said I was as beautiful and thorny as the roses she tended in her backyard garden. Born in 1956, in the suffocating heat of Atlanta, I came into this world during an era when Black folk like me had to navigate a labyrinth of Jim Crow laws and unspoken rules that could get you killed for looking at the wrong person the wrong way. My daddy, Isaiah, worked himself to the bone in a textile factory, his hands permanently stained with dye and his back bent from years of lifting. Mama, Coretta, cleaned the grand houses of white families in Buckhead, coming home with stories of their opulence and waste that both fascinated and fueled my young ambition. "Baby girl," Mama would say as she soaked her feet in Epsom salt after 14-hour days, "you don't let this world define what you can't become. You hear me? They're going to try to put you in a box, tell you to stay small, stay quiet, stay grateful for scraps. But you got fire in you. I can see it burning behind those eyes." She was right about that fire. Even as a child, I devoured books like they were oxygen, excelling in every subject despite attending underfunded schools where we shared textbooks and made do with hand-me-down supplies. When integration finally came, I was one of the first Black students to walk into previously all-white classrooms, enduring stares, whispers, and worse while maintaining my dignity and my grades. College came through a combination of academic scholarships, late-night jobs, and sheer determination. I majored in business with a minor in literature, the business degree to build wealth, the literature to feed my soul with stories of resilience and triumph. That's where I met Victor Thompson in 1975 at a campus rally for civil rights. He was this tall, earnest white boy from a working-class Irish family in Chicago, studying engineering with dreams of building bridges, both literal and metaphorical. Our love was revolutionary in itself, an interracial couple in the mid-70s when such unions still turned heads and caused whispers. But Victor saw me, truly saw me, in a way that made all the stares and judgments fade into background noise. We married in a small ceremony in 1976, moved to Chicago, where Victor landed a job with a construction firm, and I began building what would become my secret empire. Starting small with my first property flip, a rundown duplex on the south side that I renovated with my own hands and Victor's engineering expertise, I discovered I had an eye for real estate that borders on supernatural. While Victor climbed the corporate ladder, providing her steady, respectable income, I was quietly acquiring properties, studying market trends, and making investments that would compound into millions over the decades. But here's the thing that would surprise everyone who knew us. I funded Victor's rise in the construction world. Every promotion, every prestigious project, every step up that corporate ladder was built on my money, funneled through shell companies and silent partnerships. By the 1990s, I had stakes in tech startups that would become household names, owned a portfolio of commercial real estate across 3 states, and had enough liquid assets to buy and sell half the neighborhood we lived in. Yet to the world, we were just a modest middle-class family. Victor, the hard-working construction manager, me, the devoted wife and mother who baked cookies for school fundraisers and kept house with quiet efficiency. Why the secrecy? Because I'd learned early that money changes people, and trust is the most fragile currency of all. I'd watched families torn apart by inheritance disputes, seen marriages crumble under the weight of financial power imbalances, witnessed friends become enemies over dollar signs. Trust is fragile, baby, I'd whisper to myself during those late-night hours when I'd review investment portfolios and property assessments. But betrayal cuts deepest when it comes from those you love. Our son Marcus arrived in 1980, a beautiful blend of both our heritages with Victor's green eyes and my stubborn determination. I took a brief hiatus from active real estate dealings to focus on raising him, but even during those early years, I never stopped hustling. While Marcus napped, I'd make calls to contractors, review property listings, and manage my growing empire from our modest suburban kitchen. Victor knew enough to trust my business instincts. He'd see the steady improvements to our lifestyle, the private school tuition that appeared without strain, the family vacations that somehow fit our budget. But he preferred not to ask too many probing questions. "As long as we're happy and secure, Rosa," he'd say with that gentle smile that could calm any storm, "I trust your judgment completely." Marcus grew into a kind soul, perhaps too kind for his own good. He inherited Victor's gentle nature and my emotional intelligence, but lacked the street smarts and cynicism that had served me so well. After college, he drifted into sales, a decent career that provided a comfortable living, but nothing spectacular. He was the type of man who saw the best in everyone, who believed in fairness and honesty as governing principles, who couldn't fathom that people might wear masks to hide their true intentions. I loved this about my son, but it also worried me. The world could be cruel to trusting souls. Victor's construction career flourished throughout the 80s and 90s, with him eventually becoming a senior project manager at Thompson and Associates, a firm that, unbeknownst to him, I had quietly acquired a controlling interest in during the early 2000s. Every major contract, every prestigious building project, every professional milestone was orchestrated by my behind-the-scenes maneuvering. When he'd come home proud of landing a big client or securing a lucrative deal, I'd smile and celebrate with him, never letting on that I'd been pulling strings to ensure his success. It wasn't about control, it was about protection. In a world that often didn't value Black women's contributions, I'd learned to wield power from the shadows. Our suburban life in a tree-lined neighborhood west of Chicago was deliberately modest. The house was nice, but not ostentatious, for bedrooms, 2.5 baths, a well-maintained lawn that Victor tended with weekend devotion. We drove reliable cars, shopped at regular grocery stores, attended the local Baptist church, where I sang in the choir and Victor served as an usher. To our neighbors, we were the Thompson family, hard-working, God-fearing, middle-class folk who embodied the American dream. They had no idea that the quiet woman who brought covered dishes to potluck dinners could buy their entire subdivision without blinking. My investment portfolio had expanded beyond real estate into early tech companies, emerging markets, and even entertainment ventures. I owned 3 event venues across Illinois, held significant stakes in a chain of restaurants, and had enough diversified wealth to weather any economic storm. The Grand Oaks Pavilion, which would later become the stage for my ultimate revelation, was perhaps my crown jewel, a sprawling event space on 40 acres of manicured grounds that I'd acquired in 2010 for $8 million. It was now worth north of $30 million, hosting everything from high society weddings to corporate galas. But Victor's health began declining in his mid-60s. What started as a persistent cough became shortness of breath, then fatigue, then the devastating diagnosis: Stage 4 lung cancer, aggressive and unforgiving. The man who'd spent his life building structures that would outlast him was being torn down from the inside, cell by cell. As his strength faded, mine had to multiply. I became his advocate, his researcher, his shield against a medical system that sometimes moved too slowly for my liking. Every experimental treatment, every specialist consultation, every possible avenue for hope, I pursued them all, funding his care through my network of charitable foundations and medical contacts. Marcus brought Bianca home for the first time 5 years ago, during one of those crisp autumn evenings when the leaves were turning and hope felt possible despite Victor's ongoing health struggles. She stepped out of Marcus's car like she was walking a red carpet, tall, polished, with the kind of confidence that money and privilege bestow from birth. Bianca Rossi, 35 years old, a marketing director for a prestigious firm in downtown Chicago, came from one of those established Italian-American families in New York where success was expected and mediocrity was never an option. She was undeniably beautiful, with dark hair that fell in perfect waves, olive skin that seemed to glow with expensive skincare treatments, and a wardrobe that screamed designer without ever being tacky. When Marcus introduced her, his face lit up with the kind of joy I hadn't seen since he was a teenager, showing off a perfect report card. "Mom, Dad, this is Bianca," he said, his arm around her waist with protective pride. "She's the one I've been telling you about." I welcomed her with open arms, literally and figuratively. I cooked my famous Sunday dinner: fried chicken, collard greens with smoked turkey, cornbread that would make angels weep, and my grandmother's secret recipe, peach cobbler. I set the dining room table with my good china, lit candles, and pulled out photo albums to share family stories. But from the moment she walked into our home, I could sense her taking inventory. Her eyes swept over our furniture, our artwork, our modest but comfortable lifestyle, and I saw something flicker across her features. Disappointment? Calculation? It was subtle, but I'd spent decades reading people's faces in business negotiations. "Mrs. Thompson," she said with a smile that was perfect in its emptiness, "your home is so charming, very authentic." The way she said authentic made it sound like a polite synonym for outdated. During dinner, she dominated conversation with stories about her career, her family's restaurant empire in Queens, her MBA from Northwestern. When I tried to share stories about the civil rights marches I'd participated in as a young woman, or the community work I'd done over the years, she'd listen with the glazed expression of someone waiting for her turn to speak. The microaggressions started almost immediately. "Mrs. Thompson, you should really try shopping online," she'd suggest with that bright, condescending smile. "It would update your style considerably." When I'd cook for family gatherings, she'd push food around her plate and comment, "This is so heavy, Alara. Have you considered Mediterranean cuisine? It's much healthier." She'd correct my grammar in front of others, suggesting I'd said incorrect instead of inaccurate, or interrupt my stories to insert her own opinions as if mine weren't quite finished forming. Victor, bless his diplomatic heart, tried to smooth over the tensions with his characteristic gentle humor. "Bianca's just got different experiences than us, Rosa," he'd say privately. "Give her time to adjust." Marcus was caught in the middle, clearly smitten but increasingly uncomfortable with his fiancée's treatment of his parents. I could see him making mental calculations. How much of her behavior could he excuse? How many of her slights could he rationalize as cultural differences or social anxiety? But I knew better. I'd spent my entire life around people who smiled to your face while calculating your worth, who measured your value by your zip code and your accent and the labels in your clothes. Bianca wasn't just culturally different. She was dismissive, condescending, and increasingly comfortable showing her disdain for what she perceived as our lower-class lifestyle. What she didn't know, what none of them knew except Victor, was that the woman she was treating like a country relic could buy her family's restaurant empire without touching the principal on my investment accounts. And as Victor's condition worsened, as we spent more time in hospitals and specialist offices, Bianca's true character began emerging like a photograph developing in a darkroom. The mask was slipping, and what lay underneath would eventually threaten everything I'd built and protected for over 4 decades. The cancer took Victor slowly, like a thief stealing pieces of him one cell at a time. What had started as stage became something beyond classification, a relentless invader that no amount of money or medical expertise could completely halt. I watched my husband of 45 years transform from the robust man who could carry me up 2 flights of stairs on our anniversary to a fragile shadow who needed help buttoning his shirts. Each treatment was a gamble with increasingly poor odds, but I funded every experimental therapy, every specialist consultation, every possible avenue of hope through a network of charitable foundations I'd established over the years. The bills were astronomical, $50,000 for a single round of immunotherapy, $80,000 for genetic testing and personalized treatments, hundreds of thousands for clinical trials at Mayo Clinic and MD Anderson. But Bianca didn't know that I was covering these costs through carefully orchestrated donations from my various trusts. To her, we were this middle-class family somehow managing to afford cutting-edge cancer care on a construction manager's salary and whatever modest income she assumed I contributed. Her complaints started as whispered concerns to Marcus. "Honey, we need to be realistic about your father's treatment options," she'd murmured during family dinners when Victor was resting upstairs. "These experimental therapies are bankrupting your parents. Maybe it's time to consider quality of life over quantity." The way she said it made my skin crawl, as if she'd calculated Victor's remaining value and found it wanting. But it was the phone conversations I overheard that revealed the true depth of her callousness. Standing in the hospital hallway while Victor underwent yet another round of chemo, I heard her voice carrying from the family waiting area. "Sarah, you don't understand how exhausting this is. Every weekend is hospital visits and family obligations. I can't build my career with all this drama." A pause, then a laugh that sounded like breaking glass. "Once Victor's gone, and honestly it can't be much longer, we can finally move forward. Upgrade that house, maybe convince Marcus his mother needs professional care. She's getting forgetful anyway." The betrayal hit me like a physical blow. Here I was spending sleepless nights researching treatments, holding Victor's hand through chemo sessions, fighting insurance companies, and coordinating with specialists, while this woman was planning our disposal like outdated furniture. But the worst was yet to come. During one particularly brutal stretch, when Victor was hospitalized for complications, I caught fragments of a phone call Bianca made from the parking garage. The old woman acts like she's in charge, but what can she possibly contribute? Marcus is too sentimental to see it, but she's just dead weight now. Once we get the inheritance sorted, I'll convince him she needs to be in a facility. It's cruel to let her pretend she can take care of herself. Victor sensed the growing tension even through his pain medication haze. During one of our quiet evenings together, when the house felt too large and too silent, he took my hand with fingers that had grown thin and papery. "Rosa, I need to tell you something important," he whispered, his voice carrying the weight of accumulated secrets. We'd been married long enough that I could read the guilt in his eyes before he spoke. "I had an affair," he confessed, the words falling between us like stones. 23 years ago, when Marcus was in college. Her name was Linda, and it lasted 6 months. I felt something shift inside me. Not surprise exactly, but recognition. I never told you because I was ashamed and because I didn't want to hurt you over something that meant nothing. My turn. I know, I said simply. And I had one too, earlier than yours, when you were working those 18-hour days on the Patterson project, and I was lonely and foolish, and I couldn't finish the sentence, but Victor squeezed my hand. I know about that too, he admitted. I've known for years. And Rosa, his voice broke slightly. I had Marcus tested. He's not my biological son. The silence stretched between us. 45 years of careful constructions suddenly revealed as necessary fictions. But instead of anger or betrayal, what I felt was relief. The exhale of long-held breath, the settling of accounts. But he's ours, Victor continued, his eyes never leaving mine. I chose to love him every single day. I chose to be his father in every way that mattered. And Rosa, I need you to promise me something. His grip tightened with surprising strength. Don't let her break what we've built. Bianca sees Marcus as a meal ticket and you as an obstacle. Protect yourself. Protect our son. And don't let her rewrite our story. Those late-night conversations became our reconciliation. Two people who'd built a life together despite human failings, who'd forgiven each other's weakness and chosen love over perfectionism. We rewrote his will together, incorporating safeguards I'd learned from decades of protecting assets. But the most important document we created wasn't legal, it was emotional. Victor recorded video messages from Marcus, explanations and love letters that would help our son understand the choices we'd made. I want him to know, Victor said during one recording session, that love isn't about biology or perfection. It's about showing up. It's about choosing each other every day, even when it's hard, especially when it's hard. My suspicions about Bianca had been growing like cancer itself. Insidious, persistent, impossible to ignore. But Victor's warnings crystallized my resolve. If this woman was planning to destroy everything we'd built, I needed evidence. I needed to know exactly what kind of enemy I was facing. I hired Blackstone Investigations, a discreet firm I'd used before for business due diligence, run by a sharp-eyed black woman named Detective Amara Williams, who understood the particular challenges of gathering evidence without alerting the target. Mrs. Thompson, she said during our first meeting in her downtown office, based on what you've told me, we're looking at potential elder abuse, financial exploitation, and emotional manipulation. But we need ironclad documentation. The first step was installing security cameras throughout our house, disguised as updated smoke detectors and innocuous wall fixtures that would capture audio and video without being obvious. I told Victor about the surveillance, but not Marcus. It broke my heart to spy on my own family, but Amara convinced me it was necessary. People reveal their true selves when they think no one is watching, she explained. And if your daughter-in-law is planning what you suspect, she'll eventually let her guard down. Within 2 weeks, we hit the mother lode. The cameras captured Bianca in our kitchen, pacing while she spoke on her phone with someone who was clearly not Marcus. The audio was crystal clear. David, I can't keep playing this game much longer. Yes, the old man is finally dying, but now I have to deal with his mother. She acts like she's running some kind of empire. But look at this place, middle-class suburban, nobody status. The sooner we can get her into managed care, the sooner Marcus and I can start our real life. But the caller, David, had responses that made my blood freeze. From Bianca's side of the conversation, it became clear that David was Victor's oncologist, Dr. David Morrison, and that their relationship went far beyond professional. Of course, I can get away tomorrow night, she purred into the phone. Victor has chemo at 9, so Marcus will be here playing devoted son. Meet me at the Riverside Hotel, same room as last time. The affair revelation was devastating enough, but what came next made me physically ill. Over the following days, the cameras captured planning sessions that revealed the full scope of their scheming. Bianca wasn't just having an affair. She was actively working with the doctor to manipulate Victor's treatment timeline, not to harm him directly, but to ensure that his care appeared more expensive and burdensome than it actually was, building a narrative of financial strain that would justify their eventual decisions about my future. "Marcus is already stressed about the costs," she explained to Dr. Morrison during one recorded call. "If we can present the right picture of how much this is draining their resources, he'll be more receptive to some difficult conversations about his mother's living situation after Victor's gone. She's too old to live alone anyway. It's really the responsible thing to do." The emotional toll of watching this evidence accumulate was crushing. Each recording was another crack in my heart, another piece of proof that the woman my son loved was systematically destroying our family from within. But the most damaging audio came during a call with her sister in New York, captured when Bianca thought everyone was asleep. "Angela, you don't understand how close I am to getting everything I want. Marcus is completely under my thumb. He'd do anything I suggest at this point. The old bat thinks she's so wise and dignified, but she's just another broke senior citizen who doesn't realize her time is over. Once Victor dies, I'll have Marcus convinced that keeping her at home is cruel and impractical. A nice assisted living facility, maybe something in Florida, where she can't interfere with our lives. Then we can sell that house, upgrade our lifestyle, and I can finally start building the kind of marriage I deserve." Detective Williams and her team also uncovered financial records that revealed the scope of Bianca's deception. She'd been lying about her own income and family wealth, playing up her sophistication while hiding significant debt and a pattern of financial irresponsibility. Her family's restaurant empire consisted of 2 struggling pizzerias in Queens, and her prestigious marketing job was actually a mid-level position with a salary far lower than she'd led Marcus to believe. "She's a classic predator," Amara explained during one of our weekly briefings. "She identified your son as a mark, stable income, family property, and what she assumed would be a modest but manageable inheritance. She had no idea about your actual financial situation, which makes her plans both more pathetic and more dangerous." The investigation expanded to include Dr. Morrison, whose own background revealed a pattern of inappropriate relationships with patients' families and questionable billing practices. The medical board had investigated him twice for ethics violations, though nothing had resulted in formal sanctions. His affair with Bianca was just the latest in a series of boundary violations that painted him as exactly the kind of man who would exploit a grieving family. But perhaps the most chilling evidence came from voice recordings captured when Bianca thought she was alone in our house. Pacing through rooms where Victor and I had built 45 years of memories, she would practice conversations with Marcus, rehearsing the arguments she planned to use. "Honey, your mother is showing signs of dementia. Did you see how she forgot where she put her keys yesterday? And she's been saying strange things about having money. Clearly delusional thinking. We have to be responsible adults here." Victor died on a gray September morning, slipping away in his sleep while holding my hand just as dawn was breaking through the hospital window. The rain that had been threatening all week finally began falling as I signed the final paperwork and made the calls that would transform my husband into a memory. After 45 years of marriage, the practical details of death felt surreal. Choosing caskets, selecting flowers, coordinating with the funeral home director, whose gentle professionalism couldn't quite mask the underlying business transaction. But I had one significant advantage that nobody knew about. I could control every aspect of Victor's farewell because I owned the venue where it would take place. Grand Oaks Pavilion had been one of my most strategic acquisitions, purchased in 2015 for $8 million when the previous owners faced bankruptcy during the recession. Located on 40 acres of meticulously maintained grounds 30 minutes west of Chicago, It was the kind of place where Chicago's elite held their most important celebrations. Weddings that cost more than most people's houses, corporate galas that sealed multimillion-dollar deals, charity events where the city's power brokers made connections that shaped policy and politics. The pavilion itself was a masterpiece of understated elegance. Soaring ceilings with crystal chandeliers, walls lined with original artwork, floors of imported Italian marble that reflected light like still water. The grounds featured formal gardens designed by a landscape architect who'd trained at Versailles, a 20-car carriage house converted into additional event space, and a catering kitchen that could accommodate dinners for 500 guests. It was currently valued at over $25 million, but to everyone who knew me, it was just an expensive rental where Victor's funeral would be held. The choice to hold Victor's service there was deliberate and loaded with symbolism that only I fully understood. This would be the stage for my revelation, the place where years of hidden truths would finally emerge. But first, I had to set the trap perfectly. I chose my outfit with the same strategic thinking I'd applied to every major business decision over the past 40 years. In my closet, I had designer dresses worth thousands of dollars, elegant suits from fashion houses whose names would make Bianca gasp with recognition, jewelry inherited from my grandmother and augmented by decades of careful collecting. But instead, I selected the black dress I'd worn to my mother's funeral in 1992, a simple, unadorned garment that had grown slightly too snug with age and showed its were in the faded fabric and frayed hem. The dress was more than clothing. It was a statement about endurance, about Black women carrying their grief with dignity across generations. My mother had worn it to her own mother's funeral, and her mother had worn it to bury her husband during the Depression. It was a tangible link to women who'd survived slavery, segregation, and systematic oppression with their spirits intact. But it was also bait, chosen specifically to trigger Bianca's condescension and superiority complex. I wanted her to see me as she always had, the unsophisticated, working-class Black woman who didn't understand how things were supposed to be done. I wanted her to feel so confident in her assumed superiority that she'd reveal herself completely. The dress was my test of character, and I already knew she would fail it spectacularly. The funeral planning process became my chess game. I coordinated with the Grand Oak staff, all of whom knew me as the owner but understood the importance of discretion. The venue manager, Patricia Chin, had worked for me for over a decade and could read my intentions without explicit instruction. "Mrs. Thompson," she said during our planning meeting, "I understand this is a particularly delicate situation. How would you like us to handle the reveal?" "Just follow my lead," I told her, "and make sure the audio-visual equipment is ready. We're going to need it." The night before Victor's funeral, as I sat in the quiet of our bedroom surrounded by 45 years of shared memories, I opened the manila envelope he'd left for me with his final instructions. Inside, along with his handwritten letter about the will and his wishes for the service, was a set of DNA test results that would reshape everything I thought I knew about our family. Marcus wasn't Victor's biological son. The paternity test, conducted during one of Victor's hospital stays, confirmed what he'd suspected for years but never been brave enough to verify. The dates aligned perfectly with my affair, that brief, terrible period when Victor was working 18-hour days on a massive construction project and I was lonely, angry, and desperate for connection with someone who saw me as more than just a caretaker and homemaker. His name was Jerome Washington, a civil rights lawyer I'd met at a community organizing meeting. He was passionate, brilliant, and married to his own work in ways that made him both attractive and ultimately unavailable. Our relationship lasted for months and ended when I realized I was pregnant and couldn't bear the thought of destroying two families for what we both knew was a beautiful but temporary connection. Jerome never knew about Marcus, and he died in a car accident when Marcus was 12 years old. Victor's letter explained everything with the kind of grace that had defined our entire marriage. My beloved Rosa, I want you to know that discovering Marcus's paternity was not a betrayal to me. It was a confirmation of the love we've built together. I could have confronted you 20 years ago when I first suspected, but what would have been the point? Marcus is our son in every way that matters. I chose to love him, to raise him, to be his father every single day of his life. Biology is just science, Rosa. Love is choice, repeated infinitely. I had the DNA test done not to prove anything, but to give you the freedom to tell Marcus the truth if you choose to. He deserves to know his full history, but only if you believe it will help him understand himself better. The choice is yours. What matters to me is this. We built something beautiful together despite our human failings. We forgave each other, we chose each other, and we raised a son who carries the best of both of us, regardless of whose genetic material contributed to his creation. Don't let Bianca's greed rewrite our story. Marcus is stronger than he knows, and you are more powerful than she can imagine. Trust in the love we built. Trust in the empire you created. And when the time comes, don't hesitate to show them exactly who Rosa Thompson really is. All my love, forever, Victor. The realization hit me like a physical force, relief mixed with grief, gratitude tangled with regret. Victor had known about my affair and Marcus's paternity for decades, and instead of allowing it to poison our marriage, he'd chosen forgiveness and commitment. He'd been the father Marcus needed, the husband I needed, the partner who'd supported my business empire without needing to control it. But now I faced an impossible decision. Should I tell Marcus the truth about his biological father? Would this revelation help him understand his own identity, or would it shatter his sense of family just when he needed stability most? And how would this knowledge affect his relationship with Bianca, who was already manipulating his grief and confusion? I spent the sleepless hours before Victor's funeral weighing these questions, holding the DNA results in my hands like they were fragile explosives that could destroy or liberate depending on how they were handled. By dawn, I'd made my decision. Marcus would learn the truth, but not today. Today was for honoring Victor, for exposing Bianca's betrayal, and for reclaiming the power I'd spent decades accumulating in secret. The funeral would be my moment of revelation, not just about my wealth and Bianca's treachery, but about the complicated, beautiful, imperfect love that had sustained our family through everything. Victor had given me the tools I needed to protect Marcus and secure our future. Now it was time to use them. The morning of Victor's funeral dawned with that particular crispness that September brings to the Midwest. Air so clear it seemed to magnify every detail, from the dew clinging to the perfectly manicured grass of Grand Oaks Pavilion to the way the early sunlight caught the crystal chandeliers visible through the venue's floor-to-ceiling windows. I arrived 2 hours before the service, ostensibly to make final arrangements, but really to stand in the place that would soon become the theater for my revelation, breathing in the scent of white lilies and polished mahogany while steeling myself for what was to come. Grand Oaks in the morning light was breathtaking, 40 acres of landscape perfection that I'd cultivated over nearly a decade of ownership. The main pavilion rose from the grounds like something from a European estate, its limestone facade warm in the autumn sun, surrounded by formal gardens where late-season roses still bloomed in defiant beauty. Inside, the great hall stretched 90 feet from the entrance to the altar area, with soaring ceilings supported by hand-carved columns and walls lined with original oil paintings that I'd acquired at estate sales and auctions over the years. Victor's casket, solid cherry wood with brass handles that gleamed like jewelry, sat surrounded by arrangements of white lilies, yellow roses, and baby's breath. The flowers alone had cost more than many people spent on entire funerals, but money meant nothing in the face of saying goodbye to the man who'd been my partner in building this hidden empire. Patricia Chen, my venue manager, moved through the space with quiet efficiency, directing the catering staff and ensuring that every detail met the exacting standards that had made Grand Oaks the most sought-after venue in the Chicago area. Guests began arriving at 10:30, 30 minutes before the service would begin. They came in clusters. Victor's colleagues from the construction firm, members of our Baptist church where we'd worshipped for 20 years, distant relatives from Atlanta who'd made the journey north to pay their respects. I positioned myself near the entrance, greeting each arrival with the practiced grace of a woman who'd spent decades perfecting the art of social navigation. "Mrs. Thompson, I'm so sorry for your loss," murmured Janet Morrison, Victor's former secretary, taking my hands in hers with genuine warmth. Mr. Thompson was one of the finest men I ever worked with. Behind her came Bill and Susan Crawford from church, followed by my cousin Marie from Georgia, who'd driven through the night to be here. Each conversation was a small mercy, a reminder of the life Victor and I had built together, the community we'd been part of, the respect we'd earned through years of quiet service and genuine friendship. Marcus stood by the casket, his tall frame rigid with the effort of holding himself together. At 45, he looked older than his years today, grief etching lines around his eyes that reminded me painfully of Victor during his final weeks. He wore a charcoal gray suit that I'd bought him for Christmas 2 years ago, and his hand shook slightly as he accepted condolences from the steady stream of visitors approaching to pay their respects. And there was Bianca. She'd arrived fashionably late, sweeping through the entrance in an ensemble that probably cost more than most people's monthly salary, a black designer dress that hugged her figure perfectly, paired with pearls that caught the light from the chandeliers and heels that clicked against the imported Italian marble with each calculated step. Her makeup was flawless despite the tears she occasionally dabbed away with a silk handkerchief, and her dark hair was styled in an elegant updo that must have required 2 hours at the salon that morning. But it was the way she surveyed the venue that caught my attention. Those quick, appraising glances at the crystal chandeliers, the original artwork, the obvious luxury surrounding her. I could practically see her mental calculations, the reassessment of what Victor's funeral might be costing, the questions about how a simple construction worker's family could afford such an elaborate venue. She had no idea she was standing in my crown jewel, surrounded by the fruits of 40 years of careful investment and strategic planning. The atmospheric details of the morning seemed heightened by emotion and anticipation. The scent of the flowers mixed with the subtle fragrance of the beeswax candles burning in the altar area, while soft classical music, Bach's air on the G-string, one of Victor's favorites, played through the venue's sophisticated sound system. Light streamed through the tall windows, casting geometric patterns across the marble floors and creating an almost ethereal atmosphere that felt appropriate for saying goodbye to a man who'd spent his life building things meant to last. As the crowd grew larger and the formal service approached, I found myself standing near a cluster of church friends, accepting their condolences and sharing quiet memories of Victor's kindness and generosity. My faded black dress drew sympathetic glances and gentle comments. "Elara, you look so dignified," whispered Mrs. Patterson from the choir, squeezing my arm with maternal warmth. The dress was doing exactly what I'd intended, portraying me as the grieving widow of modest means, overwhelmed by circumstances but maintaining her composure through faith and inner strength. That's when I heard them, the distinctive click of expensive heels against marble, approaching with the deliberate pace of someone who had something to prove. I turned to see Bianca moving toward me, her expression a perfect mask of concerned sympathy that didn't quite reach her calculating eyes. She paused just close enough that her voice would carry to the small group of mourners surrounding me, but far enough away to maintain plausible deniability about the volume of her words. "Oh, Elara," she said, her voice pitched at that particular frequency that women use when they want to sound caring while delivering a knife thrust. Her eyes swept over my appearance with a kind of thorough assessment that left no detail unexamined. The faded fabric, the slightly too snug fit across my hips, the frayed hem that spoke of decades of wear, the absence of expensive jewelry or accessories. That dress, it's so vintage. The pause before vintage stretched just long enough to let everyone within earshot understand that she meant something far less charitable. But she wasn't finished. Bianca had an audience now, Marcus's co-workers or church friends, relatives who'd traveled from out of state, and she was performing for them with the skill of someone who'd perfected the art of passive-aggressive warfare. "I mean, it's positively ancient," she continued, her voice gaining confidence as she warmed to her theme. "It looks like something you might find at a thrift store, one of those places where people donate clothes they can't bear to throw away but would never wear again." The laugh that followed was her signature sound. Sharp, tinkling, crystalline in its perfection, and utterly devoid of warmth. It echoed through the hushed reverence of the funeral gathering like the sound of something precious being deliberately shattered. "Bianca!" Marcus said sharply from across the room, but his voice carried the exhaustion of someone who'd had this conversation before, who was too drained by grief to muster real authority. She waved him off with a gesture that managed to be both dismissive and apologetic, as if she were being chastised for telling an uncomfortable truth that everyone else was too polite to acknowledge. "I'm just saying," she continued, turning back to me with that same bright, empty smile. Victor deserved better than this pauper send-off. "I mean, look around." Her gesture encompassed the elegant venue, the expensive flowers, the obvious luxury of our surroundings. Someone clearly spent serious money on this beautiful service. It's such a shame that the family couldn't, dress the part. The heads turning was almost audible, a collective rustle of movement as conversation stopped and attention focused on our little tableau. I could feel the weight of their stares, the uncomfortable shifting as people processed what they'd just witnessed. A daughter-in-law publicly humiliating her grieving mother-in-law at her own husband's funeral. The whispers started immediately, a soft buzz of shocked commentary that spread through the gathering like ripples on a pond. "Did she just... I can't believe... at his funeral? Poor Ilera." But inside me, something was crystallizing, not just anger, though that was certainly there, burning like acid in my chest. It was recognition, the familiar sting of every slight I'd endured as a Black woman in a world that often saw me as invisible or lesser. Every condescending comment about my intelligence, every assumption about my background, every moment when someone had looked at my appearance and decided they knew my worth, all of it came flooding back in a wave of righteous fury that threatened to overwhelm my carefully maintained composure. I thought of my mother, coming home from those rich white houses in Buckhead with stories of casual cruelty disguised as concern. I thought of my early days in business, when potential partners would literally look through me to address their questions to the white men in the room. I thought of every time someone had mistaken my quiet dignity for subservience, my strategic patience for weakness. But most of all, I thought of Victor lying in that beautiful casket, and how dare this woman, this calculating, manipulative woman who'd been planning our disposal like unwanted furniture, dare to humiliate me in front of the people who'd come to honor his memory. The rage was pure and clean and absolutely focused. Bianca had just made the biggest mistake of her life, and she had no idea what was coming for her. The service began with the kind of solemn dignity that Victor would have appreciated. Our pastor, Reverend Williams, speaking with the measured cadence of someone who'd known her family for 2 decades and understood the quiet strength that had sustained us through years of joy and struggle. His words about Victor's character, his integrity, his devotion to family and community created a foundation of respect and love that made Bianca's earlier cruelty seem even more jarring by contrast. "Victor Thompson was a man who built things to last," Reverend Williams intoned, his deep voice carrying easily through the acoustically perfect space. He built bridges and buildings, yes, but more importantly, he built relationships. He built trust. He built a legacy of love that will endure long after the structures he created have crumbled to dust. The congregation murmured their agreement, heads nodding as they recognized the truth of his words. The eulogies followed in carefully orchestrated sequence. Bill Morrison, Victor's longtime supervisor at the construction firm, spoke about his reliability and skill, sharing stories of projects completed ahead of schedule and under budget, of Victor's ability to solve problems that stumped engineers with advanced degrees. He had an intuitive understanding of how things fit together, Bill said, his voice thick with genuine emotion. Whether it was a complex architectural challenge or a disagreement between crew members, Victor could see the solution when the rest of us were still trying to understand the problem. Janet Patterson from our church choir took the podium next, her silver hair catching the light as she shared memories of Victor's quiet generosity, the way he'd show up without fanfare to repair the church roof after storm damage, how he'd organized the men of the congregation to build wheelchair ramps for elderly members, his habit of slipping $20 bills into the collection plate even during lean months when work was scarce. Victor never made a show of his kindness, she said softly. He just did what needed doing, with no expectation of recognition or reward. Through it all, I watched Bianca's performance of grief with the detached fascination of someone studying a particularly skilled actress. She dabbed at her eyes with that silk handkerchief at precisely the right moments, her expression cycling through appropriate emotions, sadness, fond remembrance, supportive concern for Marcus. But there was something hollow about it, a quality that reminded me of those perfect artificial flowers that looked real from a distance, but revealed their synthetic nature under close examination. Marcus's eulogy was the most difficult to witness. My son approached the podium with a hesitant gait of someone carrying a burden too heavy for his shoulders, his prepared remarks trembling in his hands like leaves in a harsh wind. When he spoke, his voice cracked with genuine anguish, the raw grief of a man saying goodbye to the only father he'd ever known. "Dad wasn't just my father," he began, pausing to collect himself as emotion threatened to overwhelm his words. "He was my example of what a man should be. Patient when I was difficult, proud when I succeeded, supportive when I failed. He taught me that love isn't just a feeling. It's a choice you make every single day. And he chose to love our family, to love me every day of his life." The words hit me like physical blows, knowing what I now knew about Marcus's true parentage and Victor's conscious decision to claim him as a son, regardless of biology. The irony was almost unbearable. Here was Marcus, unknowingly eulogizing a man who demonstrated the highest form of love by choosing to be his father when he had no biological obligation to do so. When Marcus finished and returned to his seat, the weight of collective grief in the room was almost tangible. Even Bianca seemed genuinely moved, though I suspected she was responding more to the emotional atmosphere than to any personal connection to Victor's memory. The silence stretched, heavy with shared sorrow and appreciation for a life well lived. Then Reverend Williams called my name. "Mrs. Thompson, would you like to share some words about your husband?" This was my moment. I rose from my seat slowly, the faded black dress rustling softly as I moved. Every eye in the room followed my progress toward the podium, and I could feel their sympathy like a warm embrace. These people who'd known me for years, who'd watched me care for Victor through his illness, who'd witnessed Bianca's cruelty just minutes earlier and were prepared to offer me their protective love. The murmurs were gentle, supportive. "Take your time, honey. We're here for you." Such a dignified woman. The sympathetic sounds followed me as I approached the podium, my worn dress and measured pace painting me as the grieving widow who was struggling to hold herself together through sheer force of will. I reached the podium and looked out at the assembled mourners, church friends and work colleagues, distant relatives, and close neighbors, people who'd shared years of potluck dinners and holiday celebrations with Victor and me. And there, in the front row, sat Bianca, her perfect makeup and designer dress a stark contrast to my deliberately modest appearance. Her expression a mixture of impatience and poorly concealed superiority. She had no idea that she was looking at the owner of every square inch of the venue around her, the woman who'd built a multi-million-dollar empire, while she thought I was just an aging homemaker clinging to outdated values. She had no idea that in the next few minutes, her entire world was going to come crashing down around her ears. I placed my hands on the podium and smiled gently at the crowd, the expression of a woman drawing strength from community support to share her final tribute to the love of her life. "Thank you all for being here," I began, my voice carrying clearly through the acoustically perfect space that I'd spent millions to acquire and renovate. The microphone picked up every nuance of my words, amplifying them to reach the furthest corners of the great hall where overflow seating had been arranged for the larger-than-expected crowd. Victor would be so touched to see how many lives he affected, how many people cared enough to be here today to honor his memory. I paused, allowing my gaze to sweep across the assembled mourners, lingering deliberately on familiar faces, church friends who'd known us for decades, colleagues who'd worked alongside Victor, relatives who'd traveled hundreds of miles to pay their respects. But my eyes returned again and again to Bianca, sitting in the front row with that expression of patient tolerance she'd perfected, the look of someone enduring necessary unpleasantness with gracious forbearance. "Victor was more than my husband," I continued, my voice gaining strength and resonance as I warmed to my theme. "He was my partner in every sense of the word, my companion, my confidant, my co-conspirator in building something beautiful together." A few people in the audience smiled at that last phrase, recognizing the warmth that had always characterized our marriage. But today, as we gather to celebrate his life and say our final goodbyes, I must share some truths that have been buried too long. The subtle shift in my tone was enough to make people lean forward slightly, sensing that something important was coming. Marcus frowned from his seat beside Bianca, confusion creasing his features as he tried to understand where his mother was heading with this unexpected direction. Bianca herself looked mildly annoyed, as if she were being forced to sit through an overly long speech that was delaying the reception. "You see," I said, allowing a small smile to play at the corners of my mouth, "this venue where we're gathered today, Grand Oaks Pavilion, with its beautiful gardens and elegant ballrooms, isn't just a rental." The murmurs started immediately, quiet sounds of confusion and curiosity from people trying to process what I was suggesting. "I own it. Every brick, every chandelier, every blade of grass on these 40 acres. I purchased it in 2015 for $8 million, and it's now valued at over $25 million. The gasps that followed were audible throughout the room, a collective intake of breath as minds struggled to reconcile this revelation with their understanding of who I was supposed to be. I watched Bianca's face carefully, saw the exact moment when my words penetrated her consciousness, the slight widening of her eyes, the almost imperceptible straightening of her spine, the way her mouth opened slightly as if she were going to speak, but couldn't find words. "That's impossible," she muttered, her voice carrying in the suddenly quiet room despite her attempt to keep it low. Then, louder, with more confidence, That's delusional. Marcus, your mother is clearly—" But I wasn't finished. The revelation was like a dam bursting. 40 years of careful secrecy finally flowing free in a torrent of truth that would reshape everything they thought they knew about our family. "And that's merely the beginning," I continued, my voice growing stronger with each word. "The construction firm where Victor worked for 30 years, Thompson and Associates, I founded it anonymously in the 1990s. Every promotion he received, every prestigious project he managed, every success he achieved was built on the foundation I provided through strategic investments and carefully orchestrated opportunities. The silence in the room was now complete, broken only by the soft hum of the air conditioning and the distant sound of traffic on the road beyond the pavilion's grounds. I could see people in the audience exchanging glances, trying to process information that fundamentally challenged their understanding of our family's place in the world. "Our home," I said, looking directly at Bianca now, watching her face cycle through disbelief, confusion, and the first dawning recognition of catastrophe. "The house where you and Marcus live, where you've been planning your future, it's in my name. A gift I gave to Victor 40 years ago, but I retained ownership and control." Her face had gone pale now, the carefully applied makeup standing out starkly against skin that had lost its color. Bianca shot to her feet with the sudden motion of someone who'd been stung, her chair scraping against the marble floor with a sound like fingernails on a chalkboard. "This is ridiculous!" she shouted, her voice shrill with desperation and disbelief. "You're a bitter old woman spinning fantasies. Marcus, tell her. Tell everyone this is impossible." But Marcus was staring at me with an expression I'd never seen before, shock mixed with recognition, pieces of a lifetime puzzle suddenly clicking into place. All those family vacations that somehow fit our budget, the private school tuition that never seemed to strain our finances, the way problems with money just seemed to solve themselves around our household. He was remembering. I could see it in his eyes, all the small inconsistencies that he'd never questioned because he trusted his parents to tell him the truth about their circumstances. "Mom," he said quietly, his voice barely audible over the murmurs that were starting to ripple through the crowd, "is this true?" I smiled at my son, my beautiful, trusting, kind-hearted son who was about to learn that his entire understanding of his family's place in the world had been carefully constructed fiction. "It's true, baby," I said gently. "Every word of it. And there's so much more you need to know." Patricia Chun, my venue manager, had been waiting for my signal from her position near the back of the great hall. Our eyes met across the sea of stunned faces, and I gave her the slightest nod, a gesture so subtle that anyone watching would have missed it entirely. But Patricia had worked for me for over a decade, had helped orchestrate countless high-stakes events where timing was everything, and she understood exactly what that small movement meant. She moved with the efficiency of someone who'd rehearsed this moment, approaching the sophisticated audio-visual control panel that was seamlessly integrated into the venue's architecture. Within seconds, a large projection screen descended silently from the ceiling behind me, its movement so smooth and quiet that it barely registered with the already shell-shocked audience. The lights dimmed automatically as the system activated, and suddenly every eye in the room was focused on the white rectangle that would soon display the evidence I'd been accumulating for months. "But the most important revelation," I said, my voice carrying clearly through the microphone system as I turned to face the screen myself, "concerns loyalty and betrayal." The projector hummed to life, casting its first image onto the screen, a timestamp showing the date and time, followed by security camera footage from our kitchen at home. The first clip was devastating in its clarity. There was Bianca, pacing back and forth in the kitchen I'd cooked countless family meals in, her phone pressed to her ear, and her voice carrying perfectly through the audio system Patricia had calibrated to theater-quality standards. "David, I can't keep playing this game much longer." Her recorded voice filled the hushed space. "Yes, the old man is finally dying, but now I have to deal with his mother. She acts like she's running some kind of empire, but look at this place, middle-class suburban, nobody status." The gasps from the audience were audible now, sharp intakes of breath as people processed what they were hearing. I watched Marcus's face crumple as he recognized his wife's voice, his own kitchen, the casual cruelty with which she discussed his dying father. Bianca herself had gone completely white, her hands gripping the arms of her chair so tightly that her knuckles stood out like bones beneath her skin. But the footage was far from over. The next clip showed Bianca in our living room, the space where we'd celebrated Christmas mornings and birthday parties, where Marcus had taken his first steps and we'd watched him graduate from high school. She was speaking to someone off camera, her sister, based on the audio, with the comfortable intimacy of someone sharing secrets with a trusted confidant. "Angela, you don't understand how close I am to getting everything I want," her voice echoed through the venue's perfect acoustics. "Marcus is completely under my thumb. He'd do anything I suggest at this point. The old bat thinks she's so wise and dignified, but she's just another broke senior citizen who doesn't realize her time is over." The crowd's reaction was visceral now, murmurs of shock and disgust rippling through the assembly like waves. I heard Mrs. Patterson from our church choir gasp audibly, and Bill Morrison, Victor's former supervisor, was shaking his head in disbelief. These were people who'd known our family for decades, who'd watched Bianca play the role of the devoted daughter-in-law at countless gatherings, and they were witnessing the destruction of every assumption they'd made about her character. But the most damaging evidence was yet to come. The screen shifted to show hospital hallway footage, grainy but unmistakable images of Bianca in what was clearly Northwestern Memorial's oncology wing, where Victor had received so much of his treatment. The timestamp showed this was during one of his chemotherapy sessions, when Marcus would have been in the treatment room, holding his father's hand while poison dripped into his veins in the desperate hope of buying him more time. And there was Bianca pressed against the wall in a supply alcove, locked in passionate embrace with a man in a white coat whose face was clearly visible to the camera. Dr. David Morrison, Victor's oncologist, the man we'd trusted with my husband's life, was kissing the wife of his patient with the desperate hunger of two people who thought they were invisible to the world around them. The audio from this clip was the most devastating yet, a recorded phone conversation between Bianca and Dr. Morrison that my private investigators had captured using equipment I'd rather not think too carefully about. "Once he's dead, Marcus," came Bianca's voice, clear as crystal through the venue's sound system, "will sell everything. Your mom's useless. Ship her off to some facility in Florida where she can't interfere with our lives." The collective gasp from the audience was like a physical force, a sound of shared horror that seemed to suck the air from the room. I watched Marcus's face cycle through disbelief, recognition, and finally a kind of anguish that made my own heart break for him. My son was learning that the woman he'd loved and trusted was not just unfaithful, but actively planning to dispose of his mother like unwanted furniture. Dr. Morrison's voice joined the recording. "Bianca, we have to be careful. If anyone suspects," but she cut him off with a laugh that sounded like breaking glass. "Suspects what? That I married a Mark? That I identified a family with decent assets and positioned myself to inherit them? David, you're overthinking this. Marcus believes whatever I tell him, and the old woman will be dead or institutionalized within 2 years anyway. Natural progression." The footage continued with more clips, Bianca practicing conversations with Marcus in our empty house, rehearsing the argument she planned to use. "Honey, your mother is showing signs of dementia. Did you see how she forgot where she put her keys yesterday? We have to be responsible adults here." Another showed her going through my personal papers in my bedroom, clearly searching for financial documents or evidence of assets she could enumerate for her future plans. The final clip was perhaps the most chilling, Bianca alone in our living room, speaking to herself with the comfortable assurance of someone who believed she was completely alone and unobserved. 2 more months, maybe 3 if the old bastard is stubborn about dying," she murmured, examining her manicure with casual indifference. "Then the real work begins. Marcus is so guilty about his father that he'll do anything I suggest. Ship Mama off to assisted living. Sell this dump, upgrade to something worthy of my efforts. 5 years of playing devoted daughter-in-law will finally pay off." By the time the screen went dark and the lights came back up, the silence in the great hall was absolute. Even the children who'd been quietly playing in the back rows had fallen still, sensing the adult tension that filled the space like electricity before a storm. I turned back to face the audience, tears streaming down my face, not from grief alone now, but from the crushing weight of betrayal and the relief of finally being able to speak the truth I'd been carrying for months. Bianca exploded from her chair like she'd been launched from a catapult, her designer heels scratching against the marble floor as she scrambled to her feet. Her face had gone from pale to flushed red, her carefully applied makeup now streaked with perspiration and the tears of panic rather than grief. "This is fabricated!" she screamed, her voice cracking with desperation. "You manipulated all of this. Deep fake technology, edited audio, anyone can do this now." She spun toward Marcus, her hands reaching for him with the frantic energy of someone drowning and grasping for a lifeline. "Marcus, honey, you know me. You know I would never. This is your mother having some kind of breakdown. She's clearly suffering from dementia or a psychotic episode. None of this is real." But Marcus was staring at her with an expression I'd never seen on my son's face before, a kind of hollow recognition, as if he were seeing her clearly for the first time in 5 years. His voice, when he finally spoke, was barely above a whisper, but it carried clearly in the acoustically perfect space. "How long?" he asked, the 2 words containing a universe of pain. "How long have you been planning this?" "Planning what?" Bianca's voice was shrill now, panic making her careless with her denials. "There's nothing to plan. Your mother is delusional, can't you see that? She's created this elaborate fantasy because she can't accept that I'm successful, that I come from money, that I'm not the simple little housewife she thinks you should have married." I stepped closer to the microphone, my voice carrying authority that silenced the murmurs rippling through the crowd. "I loved you like a daughter, Bianca," I said, my words breaking with genuine anguish. The pain in my voice was real. Beneath the anger and the satisfaction of exposure was the deeper hurt of someone who'd opened her heart to a person who'd seen that openness as weakness to exploit. "I welcomed you into our family. I taught you my grandmother's recipes. I defended you when church ladies whispered about your differences with our way of doing things." "You never," she started, but I wasn't finished. "I watched you mock my husband while he was dying," I continued, my voice growing stronger with each word. "I listened to you plan his funeral like it was an inconvenience interrupting your social calendar. I heard you dismiss 45 years of our marriage as the simple life of simple people who didn't understand real success." The tears were flowing freely now, grief and rage and disappointment creating a torrent of emotion that seemed to draw sympathy from every person in the room except the one who'd caused it. Marcus stood slowly, his movement deliberate and careful, like someone testing whether the ground beneath them was solid. When he looked at Bianca, his face was a map of devastation, betrayal etched in every line, love curdling into something that might become hatred given time to ferment. "The doctor?" he asked quietly. "Dr. Morrison?" "Well, Dad was—" He couldn't finish the sentence, but he didn't need to. Bianca's denials were becoming increasingly frantic, her polished exterior cracking to reveal something ugly underneath. "Those recordings are fake. Anyone with a computer can fake audio now. She hired actors. She probably hired that man who looks like Dr. Morrison, too." That's when I made the gesture I'd been anticipating since the moment I'd planned this revelation. A simple raised hand, nothing dramatic or theatrical. But Patricia Chin and the 2 security guards she'd positioned discreetly near the exits recognized it immediately. They moved with the quiet efficiency of professionals who'd been briefed extensively on how this moment might unfold. "As the owner of this venue," I said, my voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed, "I'm revoking your access to this property. You need to leave. Now, the security guards, both men I'd employed through my various business interests, trained professionals who understood the importance of discretion, approached Bianca with careful deference. They weren't rough or dramatic. They simply positioned themselves on either side of her with the kind of quiet authority that makes resistance seem futile rather than heroic. "Ma'am," the taller guard said politely, "we need you to come with us." But Bianca wasn't going quietly. The facade of sophistication that she'd maintained for 5 years finally shattered completely, revealing something desperate and ugly beneath the designer clothes and perfect makeup. She thrashed against their gentle restraint, her voice rising to a shriek that echoed through the venue like a siren. "You can't do this. This is illegal. I'll sue you for everything you have. Marcus, stop them. Don't let her do this to me." As they escorted her toward the exit, her designer dress caught on the ornate door frame. $3,000 worth of Italian, while tearing with a sound like ripping silk. The symbolic justice of it was almost too perfect, the expensive facade being literally stripped away as she was removed from the world she'd tried so hard to infiltrate and conquer. The guests were filming now, dozens of phones capturing every moment of her breakdown, her removal, her final screaming threats echoing from the parking lot. In the age of social media, Bianca's humiliation wouldn't be contained to the people in this room. By evening, her downfall would be viral, spreading across platforms with the speed and veracity of wildfire. 3 hours later, we gathered in the oak-paneled conference room of Hartwell and Associates, the law firm that had handled our family's legal affairs for over 20 years. The contrast between the morning's emotional chaos and this afternoon's formal proceedings was jarring. From the soaring ceilings and crystal chandeliers of grand oaks to the quiet efficiency of mahogany furniture and leather-bound law books that smelled of authority and permanence. Marcus sat beside me in one of the comfortable chairs facing Henry Hartwell's massive desk, his face still bearing the shell-shocked expression of someone whose entire understanding of reality had been restructured in the span of a single morning. He'd barely spoken during the drive from the funeral venue, processing revelations that would have overwhelmed anyone: his wife's betrayal, his mother's hidden wealth, the destruction of everything he believed about his family's place in the world. Henry Hartwell himself was a distinguished man in his 70s, silver-haired and impeccably dressed, who'd been handling the legal affairs of wealthy Chicago families since before I'd accumulated my first million. He'd been present for the creation of my various trusts and foundations, had helped structure the anonymous investments that had funded Victor's career advancement, and had drafted the complex that we were about to read. His expression as he opened the leather portfolio containing Victor's final legal documents was one of professional sympathy mixed with genuine respect for the man we'd buried that morning. "First," Mr. Hartwell began, adjusting his reading glasses with the precise movements of someone who'd performed this ritual thousands of times, "let me express my deepest condolences on your loss. Victor Thompson was not only a client, but a friend, and his passing leaves a void in all our lives." He paused, gathering the documents with careful attention to their order. Now, the will itself contains several provisions that Victor insisted upon during our final meeting 6 weeks ago, and I want to emphasize that he was of completely sound mind and clear intent when he dictated these terms. The estate, as Henry read it aloud, was worth far more than Marcus had ever imagined. The house he'd been living in, valued at $1.2 million in the current market. Victor's personal effects, including his collection of vintage tools and the classic car he'd restored in our garage over 20 years. His life insurance policies, pension funds, and the various investment accounts that he'd known about but never fully understood the scope of. All told, Victor's individual assets approached $3 million. But the most significant provision came near the end of the reading, delivered in Henry's careful legal language that couldn't quite disguise the revolutionary nature of what Victor had chosen. All assets, properties, and financial instruments are bequeathed in their entirety to my beloved wife, Alara Thompson, with the following condition regarding my son, Marcus Thompson." Marcus straightened in his chair, suddenly alert as he realized his inheritance was coming with strings attached. "Marcus Thompson shall inherit 50% of the estate described above, along with full access to the family trust established in his name, contingent upon the legal dissolution of his marriage to Bianca Rossi Thompson within 90 days of my death. Should this condition not be met, his inheritance shall remain in trust, accessible only for medical emergencies and educational expenses, until such time as the marriage is legally terminated." The silence that followed was deafening. Marcus stared at Henry as if the words hadn't quite penetrated his consciousness, then slowly turned to look at me with an expression of dawning comprehension. Victor had protected him even from beyond the grave, ensuring that Bianca couldn't benefit from her years of manipulation and calculated cruelty. "There's more," Henry continued gently. "Victor left you a personal letter, Marcus, along with some documents he felt you should see privately." He handed over a sealed envelope bearing Marcus's name in Victor's familiar handwriting, along with a smaller manila folder marked "Personal and Confidential." I knew what was in that folder. The DNA test results that would shatter and rebuild Marcus's understanding of his own identity. Victor and I had discussed extensively how and when to reveal this information, ultimately deciding that Marcus deserved to know the truth, but only when he was emotionally prepared to process it. "Mom," Marcus said quietly, his voice thick with emotions I couldn't begin to untangle, "I need to understand. The money, the businesses, the everything. How long have you been hiding this?" 40 years, I answered simply. "Since before you were born. I built it all to protect our family, to ensure we'd never be vulnerable to people who saw us as targets or obstacles. I never meant for the secrecy to hurt you, baby. I just wanted to give you the freedom to be yourself without the burden of wealth changing who you were meant to become." When he opened Victor's letter and read the DNA test results, Marcus's reaction was everything I'd feared and hoped for simultaneously. The initial shock gave way to tears, not of anger but of recognition. All those times Victor had chosen patience over discipline, love over biology, commitment over convenience, suddenly made sense in a new way. He knew. Marcus asked, his voice breaking. "He knew, and he chose you anyway. Every single day for 25 years, he chose to be your father." The legal machinery I set in motion that evening moved with the efficiency of well-oiled clockwork. By the time Bianca returned to what she'd assumed was her marital home, she found the locks changed and a notice of eviction posted on the front door. Perfectly legal, since the property was titled in my name and she'd never been added to any ownership documents. The brief marriage to Marcus had given her occupancy rights, but those rights were contingent on the marriage remaining intact and Marcus choosing to exercise them on her behalf. Marcus, armed with video evidence of her infidelity and audio recordings of her schemes, had filed for emergency divorce proceedings before we'd even left the lawyer's office. In Illinois, adultery with evidence was grounds for immediate separation of assets, and Bianca's recorded confessions about marrying him for financial gain constituted fraud that voided any claim she might have had to community property. My legal team, the same firm that had helped me structure anonymous business acquisitions for decades, moved against her with the precision of surgeons and the ruthlessness of sharks. Defamation suits for her public humiliation of me at Victor's funeral. Emotional distress claims for the deliberate targeting of a grieving widow. Elder abuse charges for her schemes to have me institutionalized. Each lawsuit was meticulously documented, backed by the video and audio evidence that Detective Williams had helped me compile over months of careful investigation. But the social media storm was perhaps more devastating than any legal action could have been. The footage from the funeral, Bianca's breakdown, her removal by security, her designer dress tearing as she was escorted out, went viral within hours. Someone had live-streamed portions of the service, and by evening, #funeral and #BustedDale were trending across multiple platforms. The video clips were shared millions of times, dissected by influencers and commentary channels, turned into memes that reduced her humiliation to punchlines for strangers' entertainment. Her marketing firm, a prestigious agency that valued discretion and client confidentiality above all else, terminated her employment within 48 hours. "Conduct detrimental to the company's reputation," read the official termination letter, though everyone understood that no business could afford to be associated with someone whose personal scandals had become international entertainment. The cascading effects were swift and merciless. Professional networking contacts distanced themselves, afraid that association with her toxicity might damage their own careers. The expensive Chicago apartment she'd been leasing, counting on Marcus's income to cover the rent, became financially impossible to maintain. Within 2 weeks, she was forced to move back to Queens, into her childhood bedroom in her parents' modest home above one of their struggling pizzerias. But the final twist in Bianca's downfall came 6 weeks later, through a report from the private investigator I'd kept on retainer to monitor her activities. She was pregnant 3 months along, which meant conception had occurred during the height of her affair with Dr. Morrison. The dates made it impossible for Marcus to be the father, and genetic testing would later confirm what the timeline already suggested. Dr. Morrison, meanwhile, was facing his own reckoning. The Illinois Medical Board had launched an investigation into his conduct, spurred by the evidence of his affair with a patient's family member during active treatment. His hospital suspended him pending the outcome of the investigation, and his wife, a prominent cardiologist in her own right, filed for divorce within days of the scandal breaking. The pregnancy revelation was delivered to Marcus through our lawyer, along with a request from Bianca's legal team for support payments and a withdrawal of the divorce proceedings. She was claiming that the stress of the funeral revelations had caused her to act irrationally, that she'd been having a nervous breakdown and wasn't responsible for her words or actions. Her new strategy seemed to be painting herself as a victim of my manipulation, someone who'd been driven to desperate behavior by my psychological abuse. Marcus's response was as definitive as it was final. Absolutely not. He'd found his spine. My son had, strengthened by truth and supported by evidence that no amount of Bianca's manipulation could overcome. The woman who'd entered our family 5 years ago as a polished, ambitious marketing executive with designer clothes and sophisticated tastes was now a cautionary tale trending on social media platforms, unemployed and pregnant with her lover's child, living in her parents' spare room and facing legal bills that would take years to pay off. Justice, I reflected during those weeks of watching her world collapse, wasn't always delivered by courts or divine intervention. Sometimes it was simply the natural consequence of underestimating the wrong person. A quiet black woman in a faded dress who'd spent 40 years building an empire in the shadows, waiting patiently for the moment when all that hidden power would be revealed. 3 months after the funeral that changed everything, I found myself sitting in my private office at Grand Oaks Pavilion, a room that existed behind a discreet door marked staff only that most guests never noticed. The space was elegant but functional, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the formal gardens and a desk that had once belonged to a railroad baron whose estate I'd acquired at auction. On that desk lay a manila folder containing a private investigator's report that would force me to confront the difference between justice and vengeance. Bianca was pregnant, for months along with Dr. Morrison's child, living in a cramped apartment above her parents' struggling pizzeria in Queens, surviving on unemployment benefits and whatever small amount her family could spare. The woman who'd once worn designer dresses and spoken with casual cruelty about shipping me off to a nursing home was now clipping coupons and shopping at discount stores, her fall from grace as complete as any Greek tragedy. The investigators' photos showed her emerging from a free clinic, her once perfect appearance replaced by the exhausted look of someone carrying burdens too heavy for her shoulders. No makeup, hair pulled back in a simple ponytail, wearing clothes that looked like they'd come from the clearance rack at a chain store. Dr. Morrison had abandoned her completely once his own career imploded, his medical license suspended, and his marriage destroyed by the scandal they'd created together. Part of me, the part that remembered her laugh echoing through Victor's funeral, the casual cruelty of her plans to institutionalize me, felt a grim satisfaction at seeing her reduced to such circumstances. She'd calculated that I was an obstacle to be removed, an aging black woman whose modest appearance meant she could be dismissed and discarded. The irony of her situation had a poetic justice that appealed to my sense of cosmic balance. But as I studied those photographs, I heard my mother's voice from decades past, words spoken during my childhood when I'd come home angry about some injustice or slight. Baby girl, revenge might feel sweet going down, but it leaves a bitter aftertaste that lingers longer than the satisfaction. When you have power over someone who's wronged you, that's when you show who you really are inside. The child Bianca was carrying had committed no sins beyond having the misfortune to be conceived by two people whose moral failings had destroyed multiple families. That innocent life would grow up bearing the consequences of choices made before its first breath, facing the stigma of a scandal that would follow the family name for years to come. The sins of the parents visited upon the children, a cycle as old as humanity itself. I opened my laptop and composed an email to my attorney, Henry Hartwell, outlining instructions for establishing an anonymous educational trust. $50,000 initially, with provisions for additional funding as needed. Enough to ensure that Bianca's child would have access to quality education, tutoring if necessary, and eventually college tuition, regardless of the family's financial circumstances. The trust would be structured to provide support without revealing its source, administered through a foundation I'd established years ago for exactly these kinds of situations. This is to be completely confidential, I typed. The beneficiary and their family should never know the source of these funds. Present it as a scholarship program for children of single mothers or families experiencing financial hardship due to medical circumstances. Whatever story maintains anonymity while ensuring the child receives the support they need. The decision felt like a weight lifting from my shoulders, not because I was absolving Bianca of her betrayal, but because I was choosing to break the cycle of harm that could have extended to another generation. Mercy wasn't about forgetting or forgiving what she'd done to my family. It was about ensuring that her child wouldn't pay the price for her parents' failures. My mother had taught me that true power wasn't just about accumulating wealth or influence. It was about having the strength to choose compassion even when vengeance would be easier. The strongest people I know, she'd said, are the ones who can choose kindness when they have every reason to choose otherwise. This wasn't about Bianca deserving help. It was about who I chose to be when no one was watching, when I had the power to make decisions that would ripple forward through generations. The child would grow up never knowing that the woman their mother had tried to destroy had chosen to secure their future. That anonymous grace, I realized, was worth more than any public vindication. The relationship between Marcus and me had transformed from the careful politeness of adult child and aging parent into something deeper and more authentic. A partnership built on shared vulnerability and mutual respect. The lies that had protected him from the burden of wealth while growing up had also created a distance between us, a sense that there were parts of my life he couldn't access or understand. Now, with all secrets revealed, we were discovering each other as equals for the first time. He'd moved back into the family home temporarily while his divorce proceedings finalized, and those months of cohabitation became a period of healing that neither of us had expected. We'd start each morning with coffee in the kitchen, where I'd once hidden business calls behind the pretense of casual conversations. But now I could speak openly about property acquisitions, investment strategies, and the complex web of businesses I'd built over 4 decades. I keep thinking about all those times you'd get mysterious phone calls and disappear into the study for hours, Marcus said one morning, shaking his head with something between amazement and regret. I thought you were just, I don't know, talking to other church ladies or something, and you were running a business empire. The grief processing happened in layers, complicated by the revelation that Victor had known about Marcus's paternity for decades and chosen love over biology every single day. We'd spend evenings going through photo albums, reframing memories with new understanding. Victor teaching Marcus to throw a baseball, helping with homework, attending every school play and sporting event not out of biological obligation, but from conscious choice. He chose me, Marcus would say sometimes, the wonder in his voice, suggesting he was still processing what that meant. Every day he chose to be my father. Working together in the family businesses became our shared therapy. Marcus had a natural aptitude for the interpersonal aspects of real estate and venue management. Skills inherited from Victor's diplomatic nature, but sharpened by years of sales experience. He could walk through a property and envision its potential, speak with contractors and vendors in language they respected, handle the delicate negotiations that turned motivated sellers into satisfied partners. I watched him discover confidence he'd never known he possessed, the security of knowing our family's true financial position, freeing him from anxieties that had shaped his careful, approval-seeking personality. When you don't have to worry about money, I realize you can afford to take risks, to be authentic, to prioritize relationships over transactions. The healing wasn't linear or simple. Some days the betrayal would hit him fresh, remembering something Bianca had said or done that now carried new meaning, processing the scope of her deception and the years of manipulation he'd endured. But those dark moments were balanced by growing excitement about the future we could build together, the positive impact we could have with resources deployed thoughtfully and strategically. I want to understand everything, he told me one afternoon as we reviewed the portfolio of properties I'd assembled. Not just the business side, but why you did it this way, how you knew when to buy, when to wait, how you identified opportunities before anyone else saw them. Teaching him became my joy, passing on not just the technical knowledge of real estate investment and business management, but the deeper wisdom about patience, timing, and the long view that had sustained me through decades of careful accumulation. He was hungry to learn, eager to prove himself worthy of the trust Victor and I had placed in him. Standing in the master bedroom of the house I'd called home for 45 years, surrounded by the evidence of a life well-lived and carefully planned, I marveled at the journey that had brought me to this moment of revelation and redemption. The woman who'd grown up in a shotgun house in segregated Atlanta, whose mother cleaned other people's homes and whose father's hands were permanently stained with factory dye, had built an empire that could rival old-money Chicago families who'd never seen me coming. The assumptions people made about Black women of my generation, that we were simple, grateful, content with modest circumstances, had been my greatest advantage. While they saw a quiet church-going grandmother in polyester dresses and sensible shoes, I was analyzing market trends, identifying undervalued properties, and building networks of influence that operated in the shadows of their awareness. Their blindness to my capabilities had been my shield and my weapon. But the deeper victory wasn't financial. It was the preservation of authenticity in a world that constantly pressured people like me to perform diminished versions of ourselves. I'd never pretended to be less intelligent, less capable, or less worthy of respect than I was. I'd simply allowed others to make their own assumptions while I quietly built something lasting and meaningful. The power of patience, I reflected, was perhaps the most undervalued force in human affairs. While Bianca had schemed for immediate gratification, planning to discard me like outdated furniture once Victor died, I'd spent decades playing a longer game. Strategic thinking, my mother had taught me, meant understanding that the most satisfying victories were the ones that revealed themselves slowly, like photographs developing in a darkroom. The generational wisdom passed down from women who'd survived slavery, segregation, and systematic oppression had served me well. The understanding that survival required both strength and subtlety, that power was most effective when it remained hidden until the moment of revelation. My grandmother's roses, beautiful and thorny, had been the perfect metaphor for a life that contained both grace and protection. Truth, I realized, was the most powerful weapon in any arsenal. Bianca's elaborate schemes had crumbled the moment authentic evidence exposed them, while my 40 years of careful honesty, even when that honesty required secrecy to protect my family, had created a foundation strong enough to survive any storm. Authenticity might require patience, but it ultimately triumphed over performance, substance over style, genuine love over calculated manipulation. Grand Oaks Pavilion hummed with the controlled chaos of a Saturday evening wedding reception. 300 guests celebrating beneath crystal chandeliers, while a 12-piece orchestra played jazz standards that filled the great hall with sophisticated elegance. I moved through the space with the confident grace of someone who belonged here, no longer hiding behind the persona of the modest church lady, but openly managing the venue that had become the crown jewel of my business empire. The transformation hadn't been dramatic because there was no need for drama. I was still the same woman who'd baked cookies for church fundraisers and sung alto in the choir, but now I could also discuss quarterly profit margins with the catering director and review architectural plans for the expansion wing we were adding to accommodate growing demand. Authenticity, I'd learned, meant integrating all parts of yourself rather than choosing which version to present to the world. Marcus stood near the entrance, wearing a perfectly tailored suit that complemented his new role as director of operations, greeting guests with the warm professionalism he'd inherited from Victor, but refined through months of working alongside me. The divorce had been finalized with minimal drama. Bianca's legal team had advised her to accept the settlement offer rather than risk having her recorded confessions played in open court. And Marcus had emerged from the experience stronger, wiser, and refreshingly free of the constant anxiety that had characterized his marriage. Mrs. Thompson approached Patricia Chun, my venue manager, holding a tablet displaying the evening's event timeline. The Morrison wedding coordinator is asking about the timeline for transitioning from dinner to dancing. Should we hold to the original schedule? The irony wasn't lost on me that we were hosting a Morrison family wedding, no relation to Dr. David Morrison, whose medical license remained suspended and whose own marriage had dissolved in scandal. But life's coincidences had taught me to find humor rather than bitterness in such symmetries. Stay with the schedule, I replied, but make sure the lighting transition is gradual. We want the mood to shift naturally. The business had grown exponentially since my public revelation, but not in ways I'd anticipated. Instead of curiosity seekers drawn by viral fame, we attracted clients who appreciated the story of generational resilience and strategic patience that my empire represented. Successful Black professionals, immigrant families building their own legacies, women entrepreneurs who understood the power of operating from positions of strength rather than desperation. Our clientele reflected people who recognized and respected what I'd accomplished. The community response had been overwhelmingly positive, particularly from people who understood the specific challenges of building wealth while navigating societal prejudices. Church members who'd known me for decades took pride in my success, sharing stories of their own hidden talents and deferred dreams with newfound enthusiasm. The narrative of the underestimated woman who'd built an empire while baking cornbread for potluck dinners had resonated far beyond Chicago's boundaries. Marcus approached with his tablet, reviewing the week's upcoming events with the thoroughness of someone who discovered a calling he'd never expected. "Mom, the Thompson anniversary party, any relation to us?" he asked with a grin, showing me the booking details for a golden wedding anniversary celebration scheduled for the following weekend. Different Thompsons, I replied, though I'd already checked when the booking came in. But schedule me to meet with them personally. 50 years of marriage deserves our best service. The healing process continued daily, layers of understanding replacing years of careful secrecy. Marcus had embraced his role, not just as my business partner, but as the keeper of family stories that needed preserving and sharing. We'd started recording video conversations about the decisions I'd made, the strategies I'd employed, the lessons learned from decades of navigating business and family life as a Black woman in spaces that hadn't always welcomed my presence. If you're still with me at the end of this story, thank you for taking this journey through the complexities of family, loyalty, and the power of patient strategic thinking. I'm Rosa, though you know me as Alara now, and this is Voices of Rosa, where we share stories that remind us never to underestimate the quiet ones, because we've got depths you can't imagine. What happened at Victor's funeral was just the culmination of 40 years of careful planning. But the real story isn't about revenge or wealth accumulation. It's about the choice to build something lasting while remaining true to yourself. Every Black woman who's ever been dismissed as just a housewife, every immigrant who's been underestimated because of their accent, every person who's been judged by their appearance rather than their capabilities, this story is for you. The comments on previous videos have shown me that so many of you carry your own hidden strengths, your own carefully guarded dreams, your own stories of being underestimated by people who couldn't see past their own assumptions. Mrs. Patricia from Memphis shared how she built a catering empire while working as a school janitor. David from Houston told us about the tech startup he funded while everyone thought he was just a mechanic. Sarah from Detroit described the rental properties she acquired while people assumed she was struggling as a single mother. Your stories matter. Your strategic patience matters. Your quiet strength matters. I want to hear from every single one of you. Tell me in the comments where you're watching from, and share one thing about yourself that might surprise people who think they know you. Are you the grandmother who day trades while babysitting? The postal worker who writes novels during lunch breaks? The church secretary who speaks 4 languages? Let's celebrate the hidden depths that make each of us more complex and capable than others assume. Subscribe to Voices of Rosa if you haven't already, because we're building a community of people who understand that the most powerful moves are often the quietest ones. Hit that notification bell so you don't miss the stories that remind us all, whether you're in Lagos, London, Los Angeles, or Louisville, that appearances can be deceiving and patience can be the most devastating weapon in any arsenal. Next week, I'm sharing the story of Marcus's first major property acquisition, how my son applied everything I taught him about reading people and situations to secure a deal that veteran investors had given up on. It's a story about generational wisdom, about how the lessons we learn from family challenges can become the foundation for future success. But most importantly, remember this: the world is full of people who will try to put you in boxes, who will make assumptions about your capabilities based on your age, your race, your gender, your background, or your zip code. Let them. While they're busy underestimating you, you can be busy building something that will surprise them when the moment is right. Never underestimate the quiet ones. We've got depths you can't imagine, patience you can't comprehend, and power you won't see coming until it's too late to stop us. Until next time, this is Rosa, reminding you that the best revenge is a life well lived and a legacy that outlasts those who tried to diminish you. Keep building, keep growing, and keep proving them wrong. Thank you for being part of the Voices of Rosa family. Your stories inspire me. Your strength encourages me. And your comments remind me that we're all connected by the common experience of being more than the world expects us to be. See you next week, and remember, stay quiet, stay strategic, and stay powerful.